Reuben Gast was 44 years old, and he had spent the better part of 2 decades believing that a man who shows up consistently, who does the quiet, unglamorous work of keeping things whole, is a man who has earned something permanent. He was not the kind of person who needed to be thanked. He was the kind of person who noticed when the driveway light was out and replaced the bulb before anyone else had registered the dark. That belief, and everything he had built around it, came apart on a Wednesday evening in late November, in the kitchen of the house he had helped pay for, when his wife of 16 years looked at him across the granite counter and told him she was done. What Annette did not know, what she could not have known, because she had been too busy celebrating her father's estate to look carefully at what was inside it, was that the $38 million she believed she had just inherited was not clean money. It was structured. It carried a silent debt obligation built into the foundation of the trust itself, and the only person on earth with the legal standing to call it in was the man she was asking to leave. If you have ever poured yourself into someone completely, your savings, your time, the kind of loyalty that does not announce itself, and been told that it was never enough, stay with me. This one is going to land. Edmonton, Alberta, late November. The kind of evening that arrives before you expect it. Dark at 4:30. The cold settling into the pavement outside with the patience of something that has been there before and knows it will return. The street lights on the avenue outside were already on when Reuben pulled into the driveway in his pickup truck, a 2016 Silverado with a slow leak in the rear left tire he had been meaning to book in for 2 weeks. He had worked a long day. The commercial renovation project his firm was managing in the Oliver neighborhood had hit a structural problem with the second-floor load distribution, and he had spent most of the afternoon on site in his work jacket, with the thermal lining, talking the project engineer through it, step by step, the way he always handled complications, not with urgency, but with the kind of methodical calm that other people in a room tend to organize themselves around without realizing they are doing it. He came in through the side door, the one off the garage, the one he always used, set his keys on the hook, left his boots on the mat. The house was warm and quiet in the way that sometimes means dinner is almost ready, and sometimes means something else entirely. Annette was standing at the kitchen island. She was not cooking. She was holding a glass of wine she had barely touched, wearing the gray blazer she kept for the occasions she wanted to feel prepared, and she had the particular expression of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say more than once. "Reuben," she said. She said his name the way you might say the name of a thing you have outgrown, a phase, a habit, something that once served a purpose. He looked at her. She told him she had been doing a lot of thinking, that the inheritance had clarified things for her, that with $38 million and her father's business now hers, she needed room to become who she was always supposed to be. She gestured, not unkindly, but with a certainty that was worse than unkindness, at the kitchen, at the life they had constructed together, at him standing in his work jacket, holding a paper bag from the Thai place on 124th Street, because he had remembered, that morning, that she mentioned liking the curry there. She said she thought it was better to be honest now, that she did not see them growing in the same direction anymore. He set the paper bag down on the counter, carefully, the way you set down something you are not going to pick up again. "You are sure about this," he said. His voice was level, not cold, just level. She nodded. She had already spoken to her lawyer. He looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, not with the sharp, sudden grief that ambushes people when they are caught off guard. He had not been caught off guard. That was the part she did not understand. He picked up his keys from the hook. He went back out through the side door. In the driveway, he sat in the Silverado for several minutes without starting the engine. The cold came in through the vents. He looked at the rearview mirror, then at the house, then at his hands on the steering wheel. Then he reached into the glove compartment and took out a small, battered notebook. The kind you buy in a pack of 3 at a pharmacy, with a dark blue cover, and he wrote 2 words in it. The same 2 words he had been writing, in the same notebook, every time a significant development occurred over the past 14 months. Next step, he started the engine. He drove to his mother's house on the south side, what she was walking away from, and what she had never bothered to read closely enough to understand, was a financial architecture that her own father had spent the last months of his life designing specifically for this outcome. To understand that, you have to go back 9 years. 9 years ago, Reuben and Annette had been living in a modest townhouse in Sherwood Park. Reuben was running a small construction management consultancy, building it contract by contract with the careful, patient discipline of someone who had started with nothing and did not expect shortcuts. Annette's father, a man named Harold Sorensen, had built a mid-sized property development company over 30 years in Alberta's commercial real estate sector, and it had been a respected business. Harold was direct, principled, stubborn in the way of men who came up without much and made something anyway. The company, Sorensen Development, was in serious trouble. The 2014 oil price collapse had taken longer than anyone expected to work its way through Alberta's commercial property market. By the time it arrived at Sorensen Development, it arrived all at once. 2 major commercial projects had stalled. A financing arrangement with a private lender had turned predatory. Harold, who was 67 years old and had recently received a diagnosis. His doctors were not yet calling irreversible, but were not calling manageable either, did not have the energy left to fight the thing the way he once would have. Reuben did not make a speech. He did not ask for gratitude or acknowledgement, or even a formal arrangement at first. He sat down at Harold's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with a yellow legal pad and went through the numbers line by line for 4 hours. Then he called in every professional contact he had. He negotiated directly with the private lender, twice, without a lawyer present, because bringing a lawyer in at that stage would have signaled weakness the lender would have used. He restructured 2 stalled project agreements, found a bridge financing option through a contact in Calgary, and spent 11 months working essentially 2 full-time jobs, his own firm, which he kept running at minimum viable capacity, and the quiet, grinding work of keeping Sorensen Development alive. He sold the Sherwood Park townhouse to free up the cash the bridge financing required. Annette had not asked him to do that. He did not make a point of it afterward. By the time the company stabilized, Harold Sorensen shook his son-in-law's hand in the driveway of his house on a Sunday and could not find words for a moment. He was not a sentimental man. The silence said what he needed it to say. Annette, that same week, had held Reuben's arm at church and whispered something warm in his ear. Something about not deserving him. She had meant it at the time. He had believed she meant it. That was 9 years ago. Harold's health declined slowly and then quickly, the way these things tend to go. In the last year, he was in and out of the Glenrose Rehabilitation Hospital, and then eventually past the point where rehabilitation was the right word for what was happening. He was clear-minded until nearly the end. Sharp, observant, the kind of man who does not stop noticing things simply because he is dying. What Harold had noticed in the final 2 years had broken something in him, quietly. The way a structural crack works, invisible until it is not. He had watched his daughter begin to change her relationship to the business. The questions she asked shifted from operational to financial. She began attending his meetings with the estate lawyer, the one Harold had hired, and asking about asset distribution with a specificity that had nothing to do with curiosity. He had seen her twice having lunch with a man who was not her husband, a commercial real estate consultant named Wesley, who had a reputation in the industry for finding opportunities in other people's distressed situations. He had been told carefully by his own accountant that small irregularities had begun appearing in the company's operating accounts. Harold asked Reuben to come alone to his room at the hospital on a Thursday afternoon in March. Annette was in the family waiting area, scrolling her phone. She assumed it was an operational conversation. She was not entirely wrong. Reuben sat in the chair beside the bed. Harold looked at him for a moment without speaking, in the way of men who have learned not to waste language. "I have redone everything," Harold said. His voice was thinner than it used to be, but his manner was the same. "The estate, all of it. The company, the properties, the accounts. All $38 million of it is inside a private, irrevocable trust now." The trust was built with a matching debt obligation, structured into its foundation, not added on top of it. He paused. "You are the sole beneficiary of the trust, and the only creditor, the only one with the standing to call the debt." Reuben was quiet. "She is your daughter," he said. "She is," Harold said, "and I love her the way a father loves a child, which means I love her too much to let her do this to herself or to what I built." He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I have watched this coming for 2 years. Maybe longer, if I am honest. I should have been honest sooner." He looked back at Reuben. "Do not show this. Let her believe what she is going to believe. When the time comes, and it will come, step in, not for punishment, to preserve what took 30 years to build." Reuben held the old man's gaze. "Yes, sir," he said. "I understand you." Harold died 6 weeks later, a small private service at a church in Westmount. Harold had not wanted a large production. The mayor of Edmonton had sent a letter. The men who had known Harold Sorensen for 30 years in the property development industry stood in the cold outside the church afterward, and their faces had the particular gravity of people marking the loss of someone who had been part of the shape of things. 3 months after the funeral, Reuben's mother called him on a Tuesday evening. Her name was Gloria Gast, 70 years old, retired schoolteacher, with the particular perceptiveness that develops in people who spend decades paying attention to what children actually mean rather than what they say. She had been at a holiday concert at her community center and had seen Annette in the lobby, speaking closely with a man in an expensive coat. Not speaking the way colleagues speak, speaking the way people speak who have convinced themselves they are not doing what they are doing. She did not call immediately. She went home, made tea, thought about it. Then she called. Reuben was parked outside the Oliver job site at 8:30 at night, reviewing plans on his laptop in the cab of the truck, which was how he had spent a number of evenings in the past year. His mother's name appeared on the screen, and he answered. She told him what she had seen, not with drama, with the careful, measured language of a woman who understood the weight of what she was saying. He listened. "I know, Mom," he said when she was finished. "I have known for a while." A short silence. "What are you going to do?" she said. "What I always do," he said. He paused. "Finish the job." That night he called Priscilla Osei. Priscilla ran a forensic accounting and legal advisory practice out of a quiet office on 104th Avenue in downtown Edmonton. She was 49 years old, wore dark blazers, and kept her desk absolutely clear of anything unnecessary, and had the specific quality of very sharp people who have nothing to prove, a complete absence of performance. When she spoke, she chose words the way someone chooses tools, precisely, and only when they were the right ones. Reuben had worked briefly with Priscilla during the original Sorensen restructuring, when he had needed someone to document the bridge financing properly. She was the most rigorous professional he had encountered in 15 years of working in a field that required him to work with many. He laid everything out for her that evening. The trust structure, the debt obligation, Harold's instructions, his mother's observation, the small account irregularities. She listened without interrupting, made notes in a small notebook with a black pen. Then she set the pen down and looked at him. "How long do you need?" she said. "Long enough for the documentation to be complete," he said. "I want nothing that can be challenged." 14 months, she said. It was not a question, more a professional estimate. 14 months, he agreed. What followed was invisible, precise, and patient. A forensic audit of Sorensen Development's operating accounts going back 40 months. Careful restructuring of the lien positions attached to the trust's real property holdings. The legal acquisition, structured through the trust, of the outstanding mortgage on the house on the south side of the river that had been registered to Annette Sorensen Gast following her father's death. Executed on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks before the evening she told Reuben to leave. Through all of it, Reuben came home at a reasonable hour. He cooked dinner on Sundays. He drove the truck with the slow-leaking tire. He sat at the kitchen table with project files and said nothing about the late evenings, nothing about the increasingly separate texture of the life they were living, nothing about the particular way Annette had stopped asking how his day had gone. Some evenings she came home after 9. He would be in the living room with his plans and his notebook, and he would look up and ask, "Long one?" She would say, "Yes," without meeting his eyes, and walk down the hall. He would sit in the quiet of the house, the furnace running, the faint sound of traffic outside, the familiar weight of patience, which is not the same as waiting. Patience is what happens when you have already made your decision and are simply letting the circumstances arrive at their conclusion. He had told Priscilla 14 months earlier to prepare the documents when he sent the word. He sent the word the morning after Annette told him she was done. 2 weeks later, Annette held a dinner party. She called it a celebration of the next chapter. That was the phrase in the invitation, printed on cream-colored cardstock, with a small embossed crest from a stationery company she had used her father's business account to engage. She had rented the private dining room at one of the established restaurants in the River Valley neighborhood, the kind of room with high ceilings and exposed brick and views of the North Saskatchewan in winter, which is gray and still and has its own austere beauty. She had invited 60 of her father's colleagues and professional contacts, longtime family friends, 2 city councilors, the senior partners from Harold's former legal firm, and several people who had attended Harold Sorensen's funeral and spoken warmly about what he had built. She wore a deep burgundy dress and the pearl earrings from her mother that she kept for occasions of significance. She stood at the room's entrance and greeted guests with the warm, forward-looking confidence of a woman who has decided her life is beginning. Beside her, making no particular effort at discretion, was Wesley, the commercial real estate consultant, no longer restricted to lobby conversations, no longer careful about being seen. At 9 o'clock, the plan was to present Annette's vision for the future of Sorensen development to the assembled room. There was a presentation prepared. She had hired a graphic designer for the slides. Her assistant had called Reuben that morning. The message was simple. Annette would appreciate his attendance. The final separation agreement was available for his signature, not in a lawyer's office, in the dining room, in front of 60 people who had known Harold Sorensen and watched him build his legacy over 3 decades. She wanted witnesses. She wanted him to sign in front of the people who had respected her father, so that the departure of the man she had outgrown would be witnessed and official and incorporated into the story she was telling. When his assistant confirmed he would come, she said, with a lightness that did not entirely conceal its edges, "Good. He can spend one more evening thinking he matters." Reuben spent that Saturday at his mother's house in the South End. She had made bannock that morning, the kind with a bit of honey mixed in, the kind she had been making since he was 7. He sat at the same kitchen table where he had done his homework and later his apprenticeship drawings, and he watched her move around the kitchen with the ease of someone completely at home in her own life. "Nervous?" she said, without turning from the counter. "No," he said. She turned and looked at him with the long, reading kind of look she had always had, the one that had never once been fooled. "Sad?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Something like that," he said, "but not the bad kind." She set down what she was doing. She crossed the kitchen and put both hands briefly on his shoulders, the gesture she had used when he was young and trying to hold something together without showing the effort. "Your dad would be proud of you," she said. "And Harold would be proud of you." He covered one of her hands with his for a moment. "I know," he said. He left at 6:30. At 10 minutes to 8, a dark blue town car arranged through the trust's management account arrived outside the restaurant. Reuben stepped out in a charcoal suit, collar open by one button, unhurried. Beside him, carrying a leather briefcase that was approximately 2.5 inches thick with organized, notarized documentation, was Priscilla Osei, in her standard dark blazer, with the expression of someone who had anticipated every variable in the room and was interested only in the sequence of events. They went in. The private dining room was warm and full and well lit, the kind of room that makes the world feel orderly and prosperous and right. Reuben moved through it the way he moved through job sites, steady pace, aware of everything, revealing nothing. He felt the room register his presence. Conversations paused. People who had known him for years looked across the room, and their expressions shifted into something thoughtful. Several of Harold's oldest professional colleagues were there, men and women who had been at the funeral, who had watched Harold age, who knew what this man, the quiet one in the work jacket, had actually done 9 years ago, when the company was 40 days from collapse. Their faces, when they saw Reuben cross the room in a charcoal suit, did something that was not quite surprise and not quite relief. It was the expression of people watching an outcome they had privately hoped for begin to arrive. Annette saw him from across the room. Her smile paused for one fraction of a second before she reassembled it. She crossed toward him, glass in hand, Wesley a half step behind. "You came," she said. There was a performance of lightness in it. The room was listening. "You asked me to," Reuben said. "The agreement is over there." She nodded toward a table near the presentation screen, where a manila envelope rested between the centerpieces. "Should take 10 minutes. Then we can all move on." "Before anything else," Reuben said, in a voice that carried only as far as necessary, "I want to ask you something." She lifted her chin, the way people do when they are preparing to hear something they do not expect to find significant. "The $38 million," he said. "Do you understand what it actually is? Not what you believe it is. What it actually is." The room, which had been managing its own murmured conversations around them, became quieter. Rooms do that. There is a frequency that human beings share, an awareness of when something real is about to occur, and they orient toward it instinctively. Annette's expression did not change, exactly, but something behind it did. "It is mine," she said. "My father left it to me." Reuben held her gaze for one beat, then he nodded at Priscilla. Priscilla opened the briefcase on the edge of the nearest table with no particular ceremony. She began placing documents, cleanly tabbed, properly bound, color-coded by category, across the white linen cloth. She spoke without preamble, in the way of someone who has structured a complicated truth for maximum clarity. "The Sorensen estate," she said, totaling approximately $38 million in assets, was restructured 14 months ago into a private irrevocable trust. The trust was designed with a matching debt obligation, $38 million, built into its foundation. Every asset in the estate is secured against that debt. She paused for precisely the right length of time. "Mr. Rubengast is the sole beneficiary of the trust. He is also the primary creditor, the only creditor. He alone holds the authority to call the debt." The room went still. Not silent. There was still the ambient sound of a room full of people, but the particular active stillness of 60 people simultaneously processing something they had not anticipated. Someone near the back of the room set down their glass. Annette's expression moved through several things quickly. First, the smooth, unbothered surface she had walked in with, then something sharper, more calculating, then something she did not have a prepared expression for, that is, she started, she stopped, that is not possible. "My father's lawyer, page 5, Priscilla said evenly, is the trust certification, filed 14 months ago, with 3 independent notarizations. Page 11 is the debt assignment documentation." She moved to the second organized section of documents. "This is a separate matter." She placed a bound report on the table. Clean cover. Sorensen Development letterhead. Over the course of the past 18 months, she said, approximately $2.1 million was transferred from Sorensen Development operating accounts into 2 private accounts. One registered to Annette Sorensen Gast. One registered to Wesley Farrow. This is documented through bank records, wire transfer confirmations, and internal accounting records. It constitutes financial fraud. The room did not erupt. These were not people who erupted, but 60 people responding at once. The quick intake of breath, the murmured exchange, the sound of chairs shifting, made its own kind of weight. Harold Sorensen's colleagues, the ones who had been at every industry dinner for 3 decades, who had watched him work and struggle and build, looked at Wesley Farrow and then at Annette, and their faces were not angry. They were something worse than angry. They were disappointed in the specific, heavy way of people who had expected better and are absorbing the cost of having been wrong. Wesley had gone very still. The practiced, comfortable confidence he usually carried was simply gone, replaced by something calculating and cornered. "You manufactured this," Annette said. Her voice was thinner than she intended it to be. Reuben's voice, when he spoke, was quiet and without cruelty. "Your father loved you," he said. "He knew you. He planned accordingly. Hold on, because what Reuben removed from the inside pocket of that suit next is what this entire story had been building toward, from the very first line." Priscilla continued, because she was not finished. "There is one additional matter," she said. She placed a 3rd document on the table. At 2:30 this afternoon, Mr. Gast, acting through the trust, completed the legal acquisition of the outstanding mortgage on the property on the south side, currently registered in Annette Sorensen Gast's name. The transaction was finalized through the trust's management account. As of 2:30 this afternoon, that property belongs to Reuben Gast. A woman near the window said, very quietly, "Oh my, the house." The one Annette had stood in 2 weeks earlier, in the kitchen with the granite counter and the gray blazer she wore when she wanted to feel prepared, and told Reuben they were not growing in the same direction. He had owned it since mid-afternoon. He had owned it while she was having the presentation slides reviewed by the graphic designer, while she was arranging the centerpieces for the table where the manila envelope was sitting. Annette stared at the document. Her expression moved through calculation and then through something that had no strategy in it at all. Something older and more honest than anything she had shown in the room that evening. She looked at Reuben, searching his face for what she expected to find there. A particular kind of satisfaction, the hard pleasure of a man who has won and wants the other person to feel the full weight of it. She did not find that. What she found was something harder to absorb than anger. He was simply sad, not performed sadness. The settled, long-worn grief of a man who had loved his wife faithfully for 16 years, who had watched her drift towards something smaller and meaner across the better part of 2 years, and who had not enjoyed a single moment of having known it was coming. He reached into the breast pocket of the charcoal suit. What he removed was not a legal document. It was a letter. One sheet of paper, folded in thirds, the creases soft from handling. The paper had the warm, slightly worn quality of something that had been carried close to a person for a long time. On the outside, in handwriting that several people in the room recognized immediately, deliberate, economical, the handwriting of a man who measured everything, including the space his words took up, was a single line. For the man who did not have to. 2 of Harold's oldest colleagues, men who had received notes from Harold Sorensen in that same hand for 30 years, looked at the paper from across the room and went very still. Reuben unfolded the letter. His hands were steady. He cleared his throat once, for the acoustics of the room, and began to read. His voice was unhurried and low, and in the room's quiet it carried without effort. "Reuben," he read, "if you are reading this where I believe you will be reading it, then she made the choice I was afraid she would make. I am sorry for that. Sorrier than I know how to say, for you and for her, because I understand better than she does what she is losing. No one in the room moved. I built Sorensen development by getting up before everyone else and going to bed after everyone else for 30 years. I nearly lost it. You saved it. Not because anyone required it of you. Not because any contract obligated you. You did it because you are a man who finishes what he starts and takes care of what he loves. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw shifted once. I could not leave what I built to be taken apart by carelessness or greed. Real love for a child does not mean looking away from what you see. He looked up briefly at the older men near the windows, the ones who had known Harold since before Annette was born. One of them had his hand pressed flat against the table. Another had bowed his head. I watched her choose, over and over, across 2 years while I was still here to watch, and I made my own choice. He turned the page. If she asks you to leave the house she did not build, let her know this. What I built was never for one generation and never for greed. It was built to last, to go forward with someone who has the patience and the loyalty and the integrity to carry it. He refolded the page once. That is you. It has always been you. I am grateful for you, son. Take care of what we built together. He folded it again. Harold Sorensen. The room was quiet for several seconds, and then Annette broke. She had held herself together through the documents and the trust certification and the house. She had maintained the posture of a woman who would not let this room see her undone. And then the letter was folded, and her father's voice was somehow present in the room, in a way that had nothing to do with sound, and something in her gave way entirely. She moved forward, not strategically, without plan, reaching for the letter the way a person reaches for something, when reaching is the only thing left to do. Her heel caught the edge of a chair. She went down hard, one knee, then both, and the sound that came from her was not composed. It was the kind of sound that grief makes when it has been held too long and the container finally gives. She was on her hands and knees in the middle of that warm, well-lit room, crying, not as performance, as the real and total reckoning of a person whose last version of the story they were telling about themselves has collapsed all at once. No one moved immediately, not from cruelty, from the particular understanding that certain moments of genuine reckoning need to be witnessed to carry their full meaning. Across the room, Wesley Farrow had been making an unhurried movement toward the service corridor near the back wall. He was about 8 feet from the door when the two individuals who had been standing near it, arranged by Priscilla that afternoon, because Priscilla arranged everything that required arranging, stepped into the frame. "Mr. Farrow," said one of them pleasantly, "please stay where you are." Wesley stopped. He looked at them. He looked at Priscilla, who was watching him with the composed, entirely unsurprised expression of someone who had included this precise development in her planning. He stayed. A restaurant staff member helped Annette to her feet. She was past the point of self-management. Her expression had stripped itself of everything practiced. She looked across the room at Reuben. "You planned all of this," she said. Her voice was raw. "You knew this entire time." Reuben was quiet for a moment. "No," he said gently. "I prepared for it. Those are not the same thing." He held the folded letter for a moment and returned it to his pocket. "And I did not do this for revenge. Your father asked me to protect what he built. That is what I did. Nothing more." He looked at her one final time, the honest, complete look of a man saying a goodbye that he has already made his private peace with. Then he nodded at Priscilla. She was already on her phone. The room settled slowly behind him as he walked out into the winter night. The legal proceedings that followed were efficient in the way that only happens when one side has airtight documentation and the other has nothing coherent to contest it with. Priscilla filed the civil fraud complaint the Monday morning following the dinner. The forensic audit had been in final form for 3 weeks, 40 months of operating account records, organized into 19 exhibit folders, cross-referenced and notarized. $2.1 million, moved in carefully sized increments, structured to stay beneath standard audit thresholds. patient, methodical work. Not patient enough. The Edmonton court issued its judgment 8 weeks later. Annette Sorensen-Gast and Wesley Farrow were ordered jointly to repay the full amount plus statutory interest, accrued penalties, and legal costs within 90 days. Non-compliance would initiate criminal proceedings under the relevant provisions of the Criminal Code. There was no viable appeal. Wesley retained a defense attorney the morning after the dinner and was, by all accounts, not sleeping. Annette went through 2 separate legal teams in 6 weeks. By the time the judgment came down, her options were 2: pay or face a grand jury. She paid. It required selling things, the leased SUV, the wardrobe she had assembled over the course of 2 years on the company's account. Several pieces of jewelry, including the pearl earrings she had worn to the dinner, which were appraised by an estate buyer on Jasper Avenue and covered a fraction of what was owed. She moved into a rental apartment in Millwoods, a clean building, a reasonable neighborhood. The kind of apartment she would have dismissed 18 months earlier without a second thought. Wesley Farrow's consulting practice did not survive the proceedings. The Alberta Real Estate Council opened a conduct review within 3 months, and 2 former clients, emboldened by the public nature of the case, submitted complaints that had been sitting in draft for over a year. His registration was suspended in March, in a hearing attended by no one who wished him well, because by that point there were very few of those remaining. The divorce was finalized in Priscilla's boardroom on a Thursday afternoon. Reuben signed the papers with a plain black pen, the same kind he used for construction contracts, set the pen down, and looked across the table at Priscilla. "Thank you," he said. "You did the work," she said. "I documented it." "Still," he said. She looked at him over her glasses for a moment. For Priscilla Osi, what followed, the faintest softening at the corners of her expression, was the professional equivalent of a standing ovation. 3 weeks after the judgment, through the routine correspondence of the separation proceedings, a question arrived from Annette's counsel. "Off the record," the lawyer said. "Personal." Annette had seen a photograph. A friend had posted it from outside the restaurant that evening, a candid taken while Reuben was still by the car, checking his phone. He looked calm, and visible in the background of the photo, through the passenger side window, was a woman sitting quietly, reading, with close-cropped natural hair, and the self-contained ease of someone who is comfortable waiting. The question was, who is she? Her name is Dr. Sarah Fontaine. She is 46 years old, a hospitalist at the University of Alberta Hospital. She has the particular combination of directness and warmth that develops in people who spend their professional lives in rooms where honesty is not a luxury. She laughs easily and selectively. She does not perform composure, she simply has it. Reuben had first met Sarah 7 years ago at a fundraising breakfast for a children's rehabilitation program that Sorensen Development had contributed materials to. Reuben had come to the breakfast himself to represent the company because that was how he operated, in person, paying attention, not delegating things that mattered. Sarah had been there on behalf of the hospital. They had talked briefly over coffee about the particular logistical challenges of building accessible spaces and about what children are capable of when adults make the effort to give them good environments. She had walked away thinking, with the quiet certainty of a person who trusts their own perceptions, that he was one of the most genuinely present people she had met in a long time. She had held that thought carefully, without urgency, for 7 years. 11 months ago, on a Tuesday evening when she was finishing a notes review at the end of a long shift, Reuben called her. He said, "I do not know if you remember meeting at the fundraiser breakfast." She said, "I remember exactly." They had been together since. Steadily, honestly, without performance. 2 people who understood their own minds, sharing slow Sunday mornings, and the particular ease of conversation with someone who listens in the way that means they are actually listening. They were engaged. The wedding was planned for May. Reuben's response to Annette's question was sent formally through Priscilla's office. Dr. Sarah Fontaine is my fiancée. We are to be married in May. No additional context. None was required. Annette read the response in her Millwoods apartment, sitting on a chair she had rented from a furniture company because most of her own had been liquidated. She read it once, set it on the counter, and stood at the window for a long time. She thought about something her father had told her when she was 17, after she had treated a quiet, reliable boy at school carelessly, laughed it off, moved on. Harold had said, "The people who don't make noise are the ones you should be watching most carefully. They've already thought ahead to where you're still trying to get to." She had not watched carefully. She had not thought ahead. She had looked at a man quietly constructing something significant in the background of her life and seen someone standing still. The morning after the settlement was complete, Reuben was on the back deck of the house, his house, at 6:45 in the morning. Edmonton in late winter. The cold, sharp and clean, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east over the river valley, the city below still quiet. His coffee was in one hand, made in the Italian press that Sarah had installed on the kitchen counter 3 weeks ago, with the unhurried authority of someone who intends to stay. He looked at the city. Several of the buildings visible from this deck had construction histories he knew in detail. Load-bearing problems he had solved on cold mornings in his work jacket. Contracts he had restructured with a yellow legal pad and a clear head. He thought about Harold, about what it costs to build something real and give it freely and ask nothing back. About how it is enough, about how it has always been enough, even when it does not feel like it, because the alternative is to become someone smaller. He said it quietly, to the skyline and to himself and to no one. "I kept it," he said. "I kept what you built." Behind him, the sliding door opened. He heard her before he saw her. The quiet sound of unhurried footsteps on the deck boards, the slight catch of breath in the cold air. Then Sarah slipped her arms around him from behind, her chin against his shoulder, her warmth against his back, holding on with the easy, uncomplicated certainty of a person who is exactly where they intend to be. They stood together for a moment, watching the city wake up. Then she said, her voice carrying a trace of gentle amusement, "The second bathroom still has no towel rack. I know, and you said you were going to look at the weather stripping on the side door last weekend. I know that too, and my mother has emailed me 3 times about the rehearsal dinner venue, and your mother has replied to all 3 emails, which I did not know was possible, and they appear to have formed some kind of planning coalition that I am both grateful for and slightly concerned about." Reuben laughed. A real one, the kind that comes from somewhere below the ribs, the kind that had been scarce for 2 years and was now, quietly and unmistakably, coming back. "Let them," he said. "They've earned it." Sarah reached around and handed him a second cup of coffee. She had brought 2, the way she always did, because she noticed the small things and did not think of it as effort. "Are you all right?" she asked, not with worry in it, with the honest, direct care of someone who wanted a true answer. He considered it the way he considered everything, without hurry. "Yes," he said, "I actually am." And it was not the composed surface of a man holding something difficult together. It was the real thing. The particular settled quiet of a person who has carried something heavy for a long time and set it down, carefully, and walked away from it without looking back. His mother arrived at noon the way she always did, with a covered dish, sweet potato soup with wild rice, the one he had been requesting since he was 9, and a look of complete vindication worn with absolute grace. She set the dish on the kitchen counter and looked around the house. Then she walked to where Reuben was standing and held his face in her hands for a moment, the way she always had. "I am proud of you," she said. "You already told me that," he said. "I will keep telling you until you stop needing to hear it," she said. She released him and looked past him at Sarah, who was standing at the counter with the particular warmth of someone who has found exactly the right place. "Now," Gloria said, "the second bathroom has no towel rack, and that is not acceptable. We are taking care of that today." Sarah laughed from across the kitchen, warm and unguarded, and Gloria gave her a look of complete approval. The rehearsal dinner debate resumed within minutes. Later that afternoon, while his mother and Sarah worked through the venue question, with the cheerful, focused energy of two women who have discovered they genuinely like each other, Reuben stood at the deck, railing alone for a few minutes. The light had shifted. The city below was going about its afternoon with the easy indifference of cities, indifferent to the private reckonings happening in any given house on any given street. He let himself think about Annette, not with bitterness, not with satisfaction, with the plain, honest grief of a man who had loved someone for a long time and watched her choose, again and again, something smaller and less real than what she had, until there was nothing left of what had once been worth choosing. He had not lost anything, he thought. That was not a thing he was telling himself. It was simply accurate. He had his work. He had his mother's soup and her complete, gracious certainty that she had been right about everything. He had Sarah's coffee and her questions and the slow, extraordinary comfort of being fully known by someone and chosen anyway. He had a house with a bathroom that needed a towel rack and a side door with insufficient weather stripping, and an inbox with 3 planning coalition emails from 2 mothers who had apparently found each other. He went back inside. These are the 3 things worth remembering from this story, not as instructions, as the kind of truth that tends to sit in your chest for a while after you encounter it. First, every document that affects your life financially deserves your own eyes and your own independent legal opinion, not the family lawyer, not the advisor someone else chose. Yours. Annette inherited $38 million and never once asked a lawyer she had chosen herself to explain what the trust documentation actually meant. At any age, but especially when estates are involved, the cost of one careful afternoon with the right professional is nothing compared to what it costs to assume. Second, the people who show up without being asked, who fix things before you notice they are broken, who call on a Tuesday for no particular reason, who drive a truck with a slow-leaking tire for 2 years because they keep meaning to get around to it, and there is always something more pressing. Those people are worth a moment of deliberate acknowledgement this week, before the moment for it passes. Reuben spent 16 years being that person, and it went unmarked until it was too late. That does not have to be your story. Third, greed tends to be quiet in the beginning. It borrows small and explains itself reasonably, and by the time it becomes visible, it has already done most of what it came to do. Harold Sorensen noticed 2 years before he acted on what he noticed. Do not wait 2 years. Trust what you observe early, when there is still time to do something about it. This story was written with care, and with the belief that patience is not weakness, that quiet people are often the ones who understand exactly what is happening, and that there are, still, ordinary moments of justice in the world for those who do the unglamorous work of deserving them.